Excellencies, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kaveh Zahedi. I'm from the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, or ESCAP, where I serve as the Deputy Executive Secretary. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this joint ESCAP ADB session on harnessing technology for post-pandemic recovery and resilience. Today's discussion really could not be more relevant to the current challenges and struggles of countries across our region of Asia Pacific. It is clear to us all that we are living through a very decisive moment. The COVID-19 pandemic's devastating impact is reaching every corner of our region and the world. Probably as we look back at this period in years to come, we will see history divided into a pre-COVID world and a post-COVID world. And a defining feature of that post-COVID world is the digital transformation that has permeated into every aspect of our lives. The chief technology officers that are in the audience, indeed many of our panel today, can say that the pandemic has done their job for them, accelerating the digitalization of economies and societies at really an unimaginable pace. The digital transformation has gone hand in hand with the rise of digital technologies. These technologies have supported governments to implement social protection schemes at pace and at scale. They have enabled e-health and online education, and they are supporting businesses to continue to operate and trade through digital finance and e-commerce. However, ensuring that the digital transformation happening all around us does not become yet another facet of the deep inequalities of the countries of Asia Pacific is now probably one of the greatest challenges we face as countries start to rebuild. Everyone online on this session today has access to the digital world. It's really very hard for any of us to imagine what life would be like during the pandemic if we didn't. But sadly, this is the reality for over 2 billion people in the Asia Pacific region. And among those 2 million are some of the most vulnerable groups. For example, some 20% of the students in East Asia and the Pacific, and almost 40% of students in South and West Asia could not access remote learning during this past year. This, of course, will have lasting effects that perpetuate intergenerational inequality and intergenerational poverty. Many of these students, indeed many of the people in our region, still have no access to the 4 core foundations of the digital economy, which are internet access, digital skills, digital financing, and e-commerce. So these people simply cannot engage in the rapidly evolving digital world. That is why inclusion has to be at the heart of the digital transformation and the accompanying digital policies if the promise to leave no one behind is to be met. Inclusion is certainly central to our own work at ESCAP. Our work on technology and innovation focuses on addressing the core foundations of the digital economy. For example, through our Asia Pacific Information Superhighway initiative, we're aiming to bridge the digital connectivity divide between countries and within countries. Our Asian and Pacific Training Center for Information and Communication Technology for Development, or APC-ICT, is equipping policymakers with the know-how to digitize government services. While our Catalyzing Women's Entrepreneurship project is developing innovative digital financing and e-commerce solutions to support women entrepreneurs who have been hit harder than most during the pandemic. To date, this project has supported over 7,000 women to access financing and leverage over $50 million in private capital for the women entrepreneurs. Harnessing Technology for Post-Pandemic Recovery and Resilience, the title of our session today, has also become central to our own work at ESCAP. Next week, ESCAP and ADB, along with our partners at UNDP, will be launching a report on responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, leaving no country behind. This report will underline the key role that digital technologies have played during the pandemic and will show how these technologies can play a critical role in building back better. However, a key message from our work is that digitalization can also widen gaps in economic and social development within and between countries. unless countries shoulder their responsibility for providing affordable and reliable internet for all and make access to the core foundations of the digital economy central to building back better. Our panel today will be sharing their views on some of the key opportunities and challenges on harnessing technology for post-pandemic recovery and resilience. I'm so pleased because in a way, we're going to be hearing from industry leaders representing some of the technology giants of our times, Amazon, Cisco, Alibaba, as well as from our close partner, the Bank of Cambodia. I would like to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of them for taking the time to join us today. And without further ado, let me hand over to our accomplished moderator for today, Carolyn, the Principal IT Specialist for Digital Adoption and Outreach at the Asian Development Bank, to introduce the panel and to kick off the session. Thank you so much. And Carolyn, over to you.
Thank you so very much, Kaveh, and thank you for the inspirational and realistic scene-setting message that you just provided all of us. And I have to say, I'm experiencing the lack of reliable internet right now myself, and that is why I'm not showing my video. So I'm so sorry I do not have good bandwidth right now, but hopefully that will change. So thank you. I fully appreciate our situation. So our panel today is all about harnessing technology for post-pandemic recovery and resilience, leaving no one behind. That means that we really have to focus even more on how we ensure development efforts and private sector efforts are inclusive to make certain that we reach everyone so that they can take advantage of the digital economy. So today, our session's objectives are to really share the good experiences and the policy priorities for harnessing technologies to ensure that no one is left behind in any country around the world. This is a golden opportunity for us to be able to change things and make things better and to live and fulfill the dreams that we all have about what we would like to see. For government officials who are participating in our session today, this panel will really enable your policymakers to review the existing policies and identify a way forward to establish a more conducive environment for using technologies to support inclusive digital economies. And for the private sector, this session will really help to identify solutions to public-private partnership in developing inclusive digital economies. So as Deputy Executive Secretary just mentioned, we have huge opportunities to make things better. There are many challenges and many, many opportunities. So with this, I would like to introduce our panelists for today in alphabetical order. First, if we may see the panelists, Her Excellency Chea Serey, who is the Director General, National Bank of Cambodia. Lee Chu Tan, Managing Director for ASEAN Worldwide Public Sector, Amazon Web Services. Clarence Barboza, who is the Director for Public Sector Business, Asia Pacific, China, and Japan for Cisco. And Sami Farhad, who is Senior Director, Globalization Office, Alibaba Group. So we will have undoubtedly a very interesting and lively conversation today about what we can do to make certain that we pursue inclusive opportunities. So the structure for our program today is that we have an hour and a half and that we will have basically 3 rounds of questions. There will be an opportunity for participants to send in your questions. And at the end, we will take time to be able to answer some of them. So we look forward to hearing from you as well. So with no further ado, let's get off to the first round of questions. COVID-19 has accelerated the digital transformation of economies around the world. We have seen this and personally experienced this as well. So this first round of questions is really to aim to have a quick overview of the latest development trends that our panelists are all seeing from their perspectives. So first off, I would like to ask Serey from the National Bank of Cambodia, how is this digital transformation changing banking and commerce practices from your perspective? And how are you promoting the digital economy, particularly for the poor, for women, or those groups of people who usually have difficulty in accessing banking or other commercial services? And you may provide specific references from Cambodia, please.
Well, thank you, Carolyn, and good afternoon to my fellow panelists and the audience. It's really an honor to be participating in this conference. Like Deputy Secretary General mentioned earlier in his speech, is that during this pandemic, we see a rise in the usage of the digital services, so digital payment as well as e-commerce. One of the challenges that we have faced here in Cambodia is the onboarding of new customer into the digital payment world. The tedious KYC procedure is a major constraint. So last year, the National Bank of Cambodia met with the industry player, and we have agreed that we need to simplify our KYC, even though it's already a tiered KYC, but we need to simplify it further so that people don't find it too troublesome to access our services. But also at the same time, the bank has been working with other relevant authorities to speed up the digital KYC platform. So in terms of the technology interface, we have already tested. So basically, our Ministry of Interior has a big database of our citizen information, so ID numbers, etc. And one thing that we try to do is to be able to use and access those database. So now we're waiting. So the technology interface is done. So now we're waiting for our Ministry of Economic and Finance and the Ministry of Interior to allow the financial sector to access and use those database. The second obstacle that we face is onboarding of the new suppliers on the e-commerce platform. And mainly this is due to the lack of digital literacy, but also the mistrust of the new platform. So late last year, our Ministry of Commerce has issued, so sort of fast-tracked and issued the e-commerce law, and with the hope that it would provide more clarifications on the role and responsibility of each player and ultimately promote trust within this ecosystem. What we observe is that once people onboard onto the e-commerce platform, the payment is still on-site delivery, which also can hamper the whole digital sort of idea of it. The third, but also the overarching issues to address is, of course, access to affordable and stable ICT infrastructure and electricity. Now, in this regard, Cambodia has made great progress with more than 90% of the population having access to electricity. This is according to the World Bank data as of 2018. So we've done much better now. I don't have the latest data. In terms of internet penetrations, we have about 58% of the population having access to internet. But one thing I need to also note is that internet service in Cambodia is probably among the cheapest in the world, and yet the use of it is still not as predominant as we would hope it will. And interestingly, from our research, because as the National Bank of Cambodia, we're trying to promote digital payment, we realized that a lot of the people don't have access to smartphone. And it's really an irony in the sense that we promote everything digital and we forgot, the basic mean to access those digital world, which is the smartphone. So we hope that eventually in the future, there will be more affordable smartphone out there in the market so that people can access and use it. I'll stop here at the moment for now.
Thank you, Serey. That's really amazing that, we just take things for granted as we try to advance, and yet some of the fundamental needs are still prevalent for people in some parts of Asia and the Pacific. So we still need to deal with some of the basics. So thank you for reminding us of that. Next, we will hear from Li Chu of AWS. What is your observation of public sector in accelerating adoption of digital services during the COVID pandemic in the Asia and Pacific region? And how has this process featured differently in advanced and versus the lagging economies in Southeast Asia? What have been your observations this past year or so?
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you, Carolyn, for that question. You know, indeed, as we think about the last 10 months and we think about the pandemic, it has accelerated the adoption of digital innovation and also created a lot of conversations around ideation. Many of our Southeast Asia governments in the region have announced plans to look at national digital roadmap and plans to speed digital transformation initiatives with the aim to obviously increase effectiveness of public services, to build more resilience and, you know, to the discussion that we had earlier, to recover the economy. And our observations from an AWS standpoint as we interact with customers around the region is that as these customers look at returning the economy to the normal state, there are a few key principles that emerge from their experience. And the first of which is the need to move fast. Time was not on our side when the pandemic hit. And as nations, you know, look at how they can and they should move quickly with new transformation projects, they're also very mindful of how they can improve and expand what they are doing. I give you an example of what's top of mind for many of us right now. A large part of rebuilding economies have to do with the vaccination programs. Moderna Inc., for example, a biotech company, selected you know, AWS as its preferred cloud provider. A large part of it is to help them look at analytics, machine learning workloads, and leveraging some of these research engine powered by AWS. It was amazing that, you know, for their first trial, the first clinical batch of the vaccine candidates, they were able to submit to the National Institute of Health within a short 42 days. So the you know, imperative to move quickly is very real as we look at recovery. The second thing that is a very keen observation on our side is that the whole COVID experience has also pointed out the benefits of an agile platform and the importance of scalability as demands evolve. You know, we are seeing customers test the envelope on cloud technology because legacy IT systems are not able to cope with the demand for scale, for speed, and for reliability. In Indonesia, we work with a nonprofit organization called Aksi Cepat Kakak. And what they do is they provide food, medical attention, and other first responder assistance, you know, in the wake of disasters. And we were very, you know, privileged to be able to work with them during the pandemic to provide the much needed scalability and agility so that a hotline was set up quickly linked to its database to facilitate food deliveries for people in need. And there is also, you know, a mechanism set up for relief fund administration. So that's kind of the second observation. And the third is really the need to now think bigger. There is a drive to look at building faster, cheaper, better integrated services, and also truly think about leveraging technology to enable missions. So the new normal also accelerated the need for innovative changes and iterative experimentation. In healthcare is a big example where we saw broader examples, acceptance of telehealth, whether it was in Singapore, Doctor Anywhere, or in Thailand, Dr. Raksa. You know, we are pushing the envelope of how do we offer on-demand healthcare services and how do we actually provide logistical improvements to have medicines sent to their doorsteps in a few hours. what I love about the whole concept of not leaving anyone behind, and also the power of technology, is that just like cloud, it is a great equalizer for anyone, and it allows economies to leapfrog. So whether you are a student, you're a developer, you are a multinational, you have access to the same technology to test ideas, to build, and to innovate. So I think that as all our nations look at recovery, there is a real embrace of technology now to move services and to deliver services in a much more efficient and a much more integrated fashion. And I'm not sure, Carol, if we lost you there.
You did lose me for a moment. I'm so sorry about that. Because I heard you almost finishing. And I thought, did she finish? Okay. I'm so sorry, everyone. But I'm living proof of this problem. And I live in a nice neighborhood. And, we still have issues. So, one can only imagine the incredible challenges that people in remote places with, more meager means have to experience. And I loved what Li Chu said about, we have to be agile and think about how we can scale our technologies, and that we have to think big in terms of what we can actually bring forward, because we want to make things better, right? We want to build back better. And that's the key to this panel discussion today, to get ideas about how we can actually do that. Next, we'll be hearing from Clarence of Cisco. Clarence, what's your observation of the key trends for digital connectivity during COVID? Apart from the ICT infrastructure, what other factors are stop some groups of people from really having access to internet services?
Yeah. Thanks, Caroline. And again, I hope your connectivity issues, really resolve themselves. But it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you again for the opportunity. We really see three key trends, from a digital connectivity perspective here. The first, and I think from Mr. Zahedi to everyone else who mentioned this, increased usage of virtual services, right? Increased usage and adoption of virtual services. That was number one. Number two is really remote access by a distributed workforce. The ability to work and the acceptability to work from home, has increased. That is a second key trend. And the third that we saw was the rising importance of cybersecurity and data privacy. So those are the three key trends that we saw. The first, really around the increased usage of virtual services. And this is true for both government as well as private and nonprofits, right? What we saw was a 40% increase in internet traffic in the first few months from February to April last year. And that traffic was really driven by the usage of video collaboration using platforms like Cisco WebEx, Zoom, Microsoft Teams to really help organizations, companies, governments, continue the work of helping and collaborating with each other and continuing work as they saw. We saw in healthcare and education in the public sector, schools going online and, again, perhaps not equally or inclusively, but the ability to quickly monitor and help and get access to content there. Same thing with healthcare. We saw increased frequency in being able to drive to remote visits and being able to diagnose. And we saw an increase in IoT wearable devices as well to help track especially the vulnerable patients, regardless of age, and monitor their health using smart technologies, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. In the private sector, we saw again an unprecedented increase in the people working from home and an increase of collaboration tools. And so that has led to teams finding new ways to collaborate and work effectively with each other. If you just look at this panel and our audience this evening, this afternoon, many different time zones covered, and yet seamlessly being able to understand, engage, and dialogue on a topic of absolute importance. Finally, when we talk about cybersecurity and data privacy, 70% of reported organizations saw an increase in the amount of cybersecurity hacks, malware, and threats. And this is an unfortunate but a real thing of what happens when we go online. And so I think that combined with the notion of data privacy is really key for us to look to address as we talk about digital inclusiveness and being able to drive the need to ensure inclusiveness across all spectrums of society. So Caroline, those were the three key trends that we saw coming out here.
Thank you so much, Clarence, for so articulately and summarizing those observations. We really appreciate that. And I have to say, I also observed those personally as well. Yeah, definitely. I think we're all experiencing those things this past year during the pandemic. And now we'll move to a bit of a broader world perspective with Sammy from Alibaba. If you could please tell us, Sammy, about how Electronic World Trade Platform, the EWTP initiative, has helped farmers from Africa sell their products in the Chinese market.
Thank you, Caroline, and thank you to ADB and ESCAP for arranging today's panel and symposium. It's a great honor to participate. With your permission, perhaps I'll slide in addition to Africa, I'll slide in a case study from the region as well. So I'll speak a bit about the Southeast Asian example as well.
Sure, no problem.
For those who may not be familiar, the Electronic World Trade Platform, it's not a piece of technology, it's not a piece of software. It's an initiative which Alibaba, working with other partners, launched back in 2016, and actually was picked up first by the B20 and ultimately by the G20 in the leaders' communique at the G20 summit held in 2016. So shortly thereafter, we began working with partner governments and enterprises around the world to set up a number of what we call them EWTP trade hubs. So there are a couple in Southeast Asia, in Malaysia and Thailand, 2 in Africa, in Rwanda and Ethiopia, and 1 in Europe, in Belgium. So the goal of EWTP is to make global trade more inclusive, particularly for female entrepreneurs and for young people, and for SMEs, which currently find great challenges when they try to deal with global trade. We think technology can provide some solutions and some opportunities, but it really does require working closely with government and local businesses around the world. So that's a bit of background. Now turning to a couple of examples, you asked about Africa, so perhaps I'll share a bit from Rwanda, the first country we partnered with in 2018. 2 specific products, and in my mind, the pandemic certainly, as folks have mentioned, accelerated and brought new kind of axes of change, but the fundamental trends from our perspective haven't changed. Alibaba Group CEO said several months back that, and I paraphrase, he said that in an uncertain world, one of the few certainties is digitalization. And so we believe the fundamental trends actually haven't changed. Some have accelerated. There have been new pressures and stresses. So turn to the examples. Since 2018, we've been working with the Rwandan government and enterprises, first through training to bring Rwandan products to Chinese consumers via cross-border e-commerce in China. So working closely, we're able to identify some high-quality producers, provide training, work with the government, and one real fruit of this was a brand we call, a brand called Gorillas Coffee. This is a Rwandan brand of coffee which launched on Alibaba's Tmall Global platform in 2018, and over time has really gained a significant amount of mind share and growth in sales amongst a certain portion of China's urban consumers. And so in the last year, actually, its sales on Chinese e-commerce platforms grew 400%. And this is a Rwandan brand. So what that means is that e-commerce allows a local company in one country via cross-border to interact directly or close to directly with consumers in a far-off jurisdiction. So rather than, this limits the number of intermediaries, because the more intermediaries you have, the more price arbitrage. In other words, the less of the total value of goods goes into the pockets of the original supplier of the agricultural or other goods. So in the Rwandan case, it's been shown that the uplift in price by dealing directly with Chinese consumers was roughly $4 per kilogram of coffee. And the Rwandan producers have also engaged in, kind of more contemporary methods such as live streaming. There was an event which we had the great support of UNECA, the African Secretariat for the UN, as well as the Rwandan government, the ambassador in Beijing, as well as a famous live stream influencer in China, that in the space of a few minutes, we sold more than 3,000 bags of Rwandan coffee back in May. So gradually the capacity of the merchants is increasing. That's Rwandan coffee. The number 2 selling brand of chili sauce at Alibaba's Fresh Hippo stores, which have an online and offline component in China, are, you can say, fueled or powered by Rwandan habanero peppers. This is an entirely new product to the Rwandan market. And frankly, is still not, until last week, was not allowed for general trade in its raw form into China. So what we did was, working with Rwandan business and government, we did initial processing in Rwanda. Therefore, as a semi-processed good, it could enter China according to the relevant customs rules. And then it became actually a big hit. Despite the pandemic, people were at home making hot pot and they wanted good hot sauce. Turning to Malaysia, I'll give an example not from cross-border e-commerce, but from domestic e-commerce. In March, the first time the Malaysian government, due to the pandemic, enacted its MCO, its Movement Control Ordinance, a very quick result of that was a trend that I'm sure many of us have seen in different countries, was that with the closing of farmers markets, supply routes, a lot of very fresh agricultural produce was rotting on the vine. So when our Lazada platform in Malaysia learned of this, they very quickly contacted a collective of producers in the Cameron Highlands area. Within 24 hours, brought them on board to the Lazada platform. And shortly thereafter, they were able to sell several tons of agricultural produce to urban dwellers in Kuala Lumpur and throughout Malaysia. And so this is a very real example that in the past, e-commerce might have been an option for different types of merchants or different sales channels. They could consider it. They thought, oh, maybe I'll do that in the future. But what happened with the pandemic was that change was forced very quickly. And so everyone had to work together to solve very real problems, such as, agricultural goods that were going rotten in the fields, if not quickly sold. Thank you, Caroline. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Sammy. So I was thinking when you said about digitalization being a sure thing, I thought, wow, we're going to have to add that to taxes and deaths. That these are the things that we will all experience, and there's really no going back to the old ways anymore. And so we really have to embrace and figure out how to make this as inclusive as possible so that everyone has an opportunity in the digital economy. So thank you so much for the examples of guerrilla coffee, which sounds really interesting, and the Malaysian connection between the producers and the consumers. Very exciting and encouraging. So our second round of questions will focus on furthering the discussion on the key trends of digital transformation that we talked about in this first round. And thank you very much, panelists, for all of your great examples and insights. And so this second round will really look deeper into policy implications. So we've heard of the examples, and now we're going to figure out how we actually can scale these things up through policy implications and actions within governments. So we will start off again with Serey from the National Bank of Cambodia. To make digital financing accessible to the poor and socially disadvantaged groups, government policy can really play an instrumental role, as we all know. So what is your view on the experience of Cambodia and its implications for other countries in Southeast Asia?
Thank you for the question, Karen. I think, first of all, it's like an insurance policy. It's always good to have proper rules and regulations in place before crisis time. so that during the crisis time, you have the buffer, you have the room to maneuver around that. So I just want to distinguish rules and policy that you do before crisis, during peacetime, and rule policies that you take during the crisis, and rule and policy you take after the crisis. But I think there is no single authorities that is truly responsible, even in terms of access to finance. It should be a coordinated effort. In the case of Cambodia, for instance, because we had a very conducive regulatory framework for mobile payment service provider during the peacetime. And so when COVID-19, or when the pandemic hit, the government were able to use the payment service provider channel to send sort of government support to people in the rural area. And so through this channel, people don't have to have a bank account to receive that, just a telephone number. They'll be able to receive that, and then they can cash out money at one of the agent banking. So that was really helpful to have all these regulatory framework in place. The other things that I think it's also important in terms of finance is the interoperability of the different services. We used to have a very fragmented payment landscape. So we have the banking industry. So these are mobile banking services provided by banks, and then serve just among the bank customer. And then you've got the payment service provider who provide e-wallet service to their own customer, and you can't actually send money across different service providers. So it's basically like you have a mobile phone, but if you're using a different service provider, so you can't call your parents. So it was quite as sort of annoying as that. So we were lucky to put in place our project Backbone, which is a backbone payment system using the blockchain technology to bring every players together on that same platform, and therefore allow this cross service providers mobile money transfer. And that's in a way really helped a lot in time of crisis, because it helped the fluidity of economic transactions and so on. In terms of the digital KYC infrastructure, this is something that when you move into the digital world, it's really important. This is something that Cambodia in a way sort of lagged behind, and we do realize that. And this is something that we constantly working with different organizations, as I mentioned earlier, to try to fast track it and move forward, because when you talk about digital transformations, first thing is you're dealing with people, you don't see their face, and therefore being able to identify who is behind the device that you are having in front of you is really essential. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those observations. There are parallels definitely here in the Philippines with our situation, and it's very impressive to see how fast countries have actually been moving because of the pandemic. Before, people weren't really using some of these technologies so often, and now quite regularly people use them on a daily basis, more and more. So it's really exciting in terms of how the technologies are being used to help reach more and more people and to make digital financial services more accessible. So thank you so much for the Cambodian experience. Next, we'll hear from Lee Chu from AWS. And this is a question that's quite dear to my heart, because I'm working on this in the Asian Development Bank for our employees. And that to really enable the public sector to adopt digital services, digital skills are so important, and the upskilling of the workforce. So how can AWS be a partner to help policymakers build this essential capacity to take people from where the processes and the systems that they're used to using and really catapult them to be able to meet the needs of the people what policy approaches should really be taken from your perspective?
Yeah, Caroline, I think you're spot on when you said that, you know, technology is so pervasive now. And as you think about it, the building of digital skills becomes a key enabler to technology adoption, but also to the transformation that all of us are talking about. And in my mind, you know, bridging the skills gap is going to require very intentional and sustained effort across the private and public sectors. AWS, for example, you know, you're asking what do we do and how do we partner? From our perspective, we have been collaborating with education institutions. We've collaborated with industry organizations and government to look at local skilling initiatives to help students and the workforce kind of keep pace with the technology expectations, advancements, etc. In fact, very recently, we commissioned a study on digital skills and the digital skill needs over the next 4 years in order to just get a holistic view on what are the skills gaps, where are the skills gaps for not just existing workers, but also the future workforce. We did that study across 6 countries, Singapore, Indonesia, India, South Korea, Japan, and Australia. And specific to ASEAN, you know, the report reviews that more than half, so 51% of the Singapore's digital workers, current digital workers, and 59% of Indonesia's digital workers who are not applying cloud computing skills, for example, today, believe that this would be a requirement to perform their jobs by 2025. And you know, our distinguished panelist from Cisco was also saying that cybersecurity is a trend. So when we look at the study, we also found that cloud architecture design, cybersecurity, large-scale data modeling, I mean, these are the top 5 in-demand skills that we are seeing across ASEAN. And so, you know, skills training is an area that is very core to how AWS wants to create, you know, knowledge and awareness in where we operate. In fact, at the end of last year, as an organization, we announced that by 2025, AWS will help 29 million people grow their technical skills with free cloud computing skills training. Right now, we have about 500 free online on-demand courses that also includes interactive labs and training sessions. We have some of these modules actually translated into multiple languages, Bahasa Indonesia, Japanese, Korean, simplified, and traditional Chinese. So that's one way of kind of reaching out to enable. For the young ones, you know, students that are 14 years and up, for example, we also provide free self-paced cloud career pathways, online learning content that would map into some of these in-demand jobs. So as we look at policy, so to your point, you know, what are some of the policy approaches? I would look at the policy approaches needing to support 4 types of profiles, worker profiles in our minds. The current digital workers who are already applying digital skills, how do we, in policy making, focus on helping them to enhance proficiency in the current skills and expand their competencies now. And then there is another group which is currently not digitally skilled. The focus would be how do we, you know, have discussions around the path for them to learn and pick up these skills to be more productive. Then in the future workforce, how do we, the third profile will be, how do we support the building of in-demand digital skills for people that are not skilled in any way now, so that it will boost employability. And then the last cohort maybe would be individuals who are maybe unemployed or involuntarily excluded from the workforce as the economies evolve, and how do we support reskilling them to open up access to new opportunities. So I think, as a culture and as a society, we're going to have to think about how do we nurture the interests of the young minds, whether with hackathons, with cloud literacy and fluency. How do we collaborate with Institute of Higher Learnings to incorporate perhaps curriculum that would be meaningful in building skills of the future? And then, for the adult learners, how do we have knowledge and training to be imparted so that they can also play a part in this whole transformation journey? So I'm going to stop there and maybe hand it back to you, Carolyn.
Thanks for sharing your truly ambitious plan. That's very impressive. 29 million people trained. I can't imagine doing that. I'm just tackling ADB, and that seems like a lot. So that's really very impressive, and I like the fact that you're working to connect the skills with the jobs, because so often people obtain skills, but then they can't find the job. So this is really, truly exciting that there's matchmaking going on. Very inspirational and exciting. So next we'll hear from Cisco's Clarence again. Clarence, how could policymakers work with private sector to enhance digital connectivity? Should governments be concerned that policymaking could be influenced by large companies such as yours, such as Cisco, and the others sitting on our panel today?
Yeah, Caroline. I think governments should work with both private sector but also non-profits, right, in setting digital policies, and they can do that really in three ways. The first is really looking at incentives to help promote digital literacy, but also in looking at incentives to promote newer technologies, and as what we've talked about now, digitalization or building up of smart, secure infrastructure, right? So that is first, to ensure proper incentives across the entire ecosystem. Our experience in this region over 25 plus years has shown us that when we do three things: offer policy incentives, promote digital education, and really education to our communities. And the third is really upskilling those who are in the workforce to take advantage of these technologies and changes in technology. That's when we have a good government, private sector, nonprofit participation. Our platform, which we call the Country Digitalization Acceleration, so Country Digitization Acceleration, CDA for short, essentially starts with us working with the country to understand the country's agenda from a digital perspective, and then working with academia as well as nonprofits to ensure that all our efforts are being helped and as a part of the country's digital roadmap. So that is one way that we ensure that it is not big corporate or our agenda that is being kind of laid out, but it is really us slipstreaming into the country's agenda. And we've been doing that across our region here for, like I said, over the last 25 plus years in different formats, right? The second really is our ability to really, establish win-win. And I think, in this region specifically, governments working with private sector partners as well as nonprofits, have shown that they can drive GDP growth, access. You've seen a number of examples already in this discussion, cross continents, in terms of being able to open up and use digital and e-commerce platforms to really drive GDP growth, uplift vulnerable communities and sections of our population, and really help and drive inclusive growth into this new world that we are embarking on, Caroline.
Thank you, Clarence, so much for that. And your CDA platform sounds like it could really help a lot of countries. And it makes so much sense that if you focus on the country's agenda, which is a similar approach that Asian Development Bank takes, then you're ensuring that you're in sync with what's important for the people there, and ensuring that their challenges are being met through a variety of ways. So that's really exciting to hear. Next, we'll hear from Alibaba's Sammy about how Alibaba or the EWTP, the trading platform, could help the Southeast Asian countries expand their international trade and market. It was really exciting to hear the two examples that you gave before about how producers are being connected with consumers across the world. So what should governments, industry, and private sector do in order to take advantage of the service by Alibaba or other cross-border e-commerce services that are out there?
Hey, thank you, Carolyn. Again, there are many services, so I'll just speak about the ones I know best, but this is, I think, hopefully generally applicable suggestions. Thank you for the question. I think what we see is that, you know, whether it's Alibaba or others, I mean, we personally we're fully engaged with governments and the private sector and, you know, other groups in the region, you know, trying to support the growth of trade and particularly inclusive trade. I think of one of the key trends we see globally is that there's a much larger growth in what you might call it small parcel cross-border trade than there is in large container cross-border trade. And so that's one thing that, you know, in general, when we think of businesses want to go where the growth is. They want to identify trends. And so what small parcel global trade does is it allows the consumers in the country to receive a much larger variety of goods than they might have been exposed to otherwise, particularly consumers in rural settings who are away from the major cities. They can get goods much greater variety than they might otherwise be able to. So I think in the light of this trend, another major trend in the region, of course, is the economic development of China. China has a very large and rapidly growing middle class. The income numbers, if everyone's seen the statistics, I won't quote them here, but they're really staggering. You know, hundreds of millions of people moving into a band where they can really have significant purchasing power. And so what that means, combining that with technology, you end up with opportunities such as 11/11, which is Alibaba's global shopping festival. On that day, or rather now it's become 11 days this year, on that period, there were literally billions of dollars of foreign brands, imports sold to Chinese consumers. So then the question becomes, you know, Chinese consumers have also in the last several years shown great interest in products from Southeast Asia, rapid growth in things like fruits, processed foods, cosmetics, latex, other types of goods. So there's a significant opportunity there. And what we do and what others do as well is we try to provide key services to enable businesses to access these opportunities. You know, how can we empower? How can we enable? But ultimately, it's up to the businesses themselves in Southeast Asia to figure out what is their business plan, because there are many different aspects to this. There are many different kind of sub-markets or sub-platforms. You know, one can think that, I think in most cases, a company probably needs to engage in domestic e-commerce before it's ready to handle cross-border e-commerce. You know, cross-border e-commerce, it could be sending goods from one country directly to another country. And as one scales up, one will likely ultimately set up a legal entity in the recipient country, able to provide better customer service, able to store goods in bulk. One needs to think about, are they selling, you know, you might call them entry-level goods or more of a luxury or premium brand. All of these different types of goods have different types of platforms, different types of sales channels, different types of consumers. So just as we would think in any of our home countries, if we want to reach a certain market segment, we need to make a detailed plan. I think similarly for e-commerce or for Alibaba, it's not just that we push one button. There's many aspects to this that ultimately the government, Alibaba, other market participants, we want to work, identify, train, educate from the government side, encourage perhaps some policy support so that those merchants in the country, those enterprises can develop their capacity. Do they want to go 2C to foreign markets? Or do they want to do more of a 2B, a business-to-business transaction? Is the business-to-business transaction going to be cross-border or domestic? are they interested in this type of new omni-channel where it's kind of retail plus ordering by mobile phone? As the businesses grow, or if they face a massive spike in traffic, do they need to think about cloud services such as AWS, Alibaba's, or others? You know, this is all, ultimately, these are decisions for businesses. I think another thing that folks in the region should keep in mind is that, particularly on the consumer side, markets are rapidly changing. Work from home leads to what? Massive spike in demand for pet products, home furnishings. People are at home, they want their surroundings to be a little bit nicer, home appliances, you know. Otherwise, markets change very rapidly. 20 years ago, when I arrived in China, China wasn't a coffee drinking nation. Now it's got more Starbucks than anywhere else. And if you go online, people want something that's different than Starbucks. They want, you know, pre-processed, fashionably packaged, instant, freeze ground coffee. They can just pour and make iced coffee right away. So markets change very rapidly. So if we're approaching these markets, we also need to, frankly, have a learning mindset and really work with government, work with partners to allow the businesses to really access these markets. So that's why I'm kind of really encouraging government and businesses to really, you know, kind of start this journey, as opposed to giving a very detailed prescription of, if you do X, you'll be successful. It's really more about, once you go down this path, then with the business perspective, with good partnership and support from government, with access to good technology and other service providers, hopefully more and more merchants from every country can find a way to gain success, you know, through different online e-commerce channels. And ultimately, I think that will contribute to more healthy trade balances. Going back to Rwanda, because of its success online with peppers, now it's getting massive orders for B2B pepper shipments into China, which literally March 11th was finally approved by the General Administration of Customs for dried peppers. So ultimately, all of these things I think are linked and can help to move the needle for trade, but it takes time and it takes development of capacity. Thank you.
That's very inspirational to hear about the possibilities and to think about what was, you know, before the pandemic, not really imaginable that small producers could actually take advantage of the global e-commerce market. And it's really, it gives me some ideas about things that are possible. So thank you for sharing those examples, Sammy. Very helpful. So that concludes our second session. We are now in our third and final round of questions. And I should say question, because this one is a question that we will address to all of the panelists. And then hopefully we will have some fair amount of time left to answer your questions. And we do have some that have come in from the audience. So thank you so much. And please feel free to send in more questions now while the panelists are answering the final question. And then we'll do our best to answer as many as possible before our time is up. So as we've been hearing, collaboration among all stakeholders such as governments, industry, and private sector is really essential for an economy to adopt digital transformation or a digital economy. And such collaborations can really take place within a country or at a regional or sub-regional level, depending upon the situation. So that can be between or among the different countries. So in your opinion, panelists, what would be the key elements for successful collaboration to really boost the development of the transformation of digital economy? And I'd ask each of you to speak no more than 2 minutes on this one, so we have time for question and answer. So again, we'll start with Serey from the government perspective.
Thank you, Karen. I mean, I also mentioned earlier that no organization can work alone, and collaboration is really essential. Maybe I can just give an example of something that is dear to your heart, which is capacity building. We've been working on our own to launch a campaign on financial literacy. And we realized that it won't be we won't be able to reach out as many people as we could, because as a central banker, you go to the village and you try to tell people what to do, and there's an immediate distress or sort of a stranger relationship. Who are you to come and tell me what to do? So we had to work with local NGOs on our behalf to tell, what a credit is, what kind of question you should ask the financial institutions. We also work with and then we also realized that we need to work with the Ministry of Education. So bear in mind that the National Bank of Cambodia, statutory-wise, we are semi-government, we're not really part of the government. So we signed an MOU with the Ministry of Education to embed financial literacy and some element of digital literacy into the general education program for a longer-term impact. We'll work also with the different ministries, for instance, Ministry of Women's Affairs, to go around different provinces and engage with women entrepreneurs, local women entrepreneurs, and explain about the importance of financial literacy, but also understand what are the digital, where are we in terms of digital transformation. It can be a very foreign word when you go to remote area and tell them about all this. So collaboration is important, but one success factor, maybe I'll stop after this, is that we need to have a common vision, and because if everyone coming with their own agenda, it's not going to happen. So with this regard, we're very lucky to engage with organizations and the ministries who shares our common visions and understanding about access to finance and how it can contribute to poverty reductions and economic growth.
Thank you, Serey. So next, we'll hear from Lichu. What are your opinions on this? What would be the key elements for successful collaboration?
Yeah, so I actually would like to pick up from where Serey left off. I would plus one on the fact that having that clear vision is important and front and center, because a lot of the challenges for organization or governments to accelerate digital innovation and transformation are not technical. They are about people, they are about culture. And I feel like, country leaders and policymakers play a key role in driving and setting the tone for digital transformation. However, collaboration across countries can also happen at the regional level. So I was, as Serey was talking, and I was thinking, like the ASEAN Smart City Network is a big example of how the ASEAN nations are coming together to look at common real-world issues like city congestion, water air quality, urban-rural divide, and so forth. So I think there is an opportunity for nation-to-nation collaboration and sharing of best practices. For that reason, we have been supporting a lot of OpenGov type, open source platform sharing, so that communities can build on top of what is already available. And the other thing that is top of mind for me is, how do we harness the spirit of innovation? And this is very much, a DNA for how AWS likes to work backwards from our customers. Our CEO said in one of the shareholders' letters that to invent, you have to experiment. And if you know in advance that it's going to work, then it's not an experiment. So the whole idea of, trying the learning mindset that Sammy was talking about is core to innovation. So what we have done is build a mechanism for collaboration across academia, government agencies, as well as private sectors, with a concept of cloud innovation centers. So the cloud innovation program, we have about 12 globally. We have 5 in Asia, 2 in Korea, 2 in Australia, and 1 in India. The whole mindset behind that is, how do we bring the community together to work backwards from those challenges? And how do we then connect technology to solve these problems, and also, get knowledge shared in the midst of doing that. So I will stop there, but I think there's a lot of opportunities for cross-collaboration and a lot of ideation that can happen when we all share, a common goal.
Thank you, Li Chu. So common vision and sharing open source resources and the spirit of innovation are what we've heard so far. Clarence, what would you like to add to those insights?
Yeah, Caroline, and I think in continuing in the spirit of the +1, I think collaboration among all stakeholders is really, really essential, because what this pandemic has taught us or told us is that neither private sector nor the government or public sector has an answer, but together, right, working together, we can definitely step up and build in the business resiliency as well as the response plans to address, not just this current disruption to all of our lives, education, health, travel, everything else, but also whatever the future throws at us, right? So it is really, really key to continue to drive that collaboration between government, private, as well as nonprofits together. The second is, in the spirit of inclusiveness, is to really consider and adapt and adopt all aspects of inclusiveness, right? Not just geography, but also gender, as well as, socioeconomics, culture, and especially in our region here in Asia Pacific, Japan and China, language, right? And having that level of inclusivity will just simply enhance collaboration. The third and my final point is around respect for data privacy. What we have seen is that data privacy is proving to be a fundamental right, and using technology as well as innovation, really, we must keep an eye on data privacy and adhere to the principles of data privacy, Caroline.
Thank you, Clarence. So that point is very well taken. Data privacy for the good of the public, right? So that we're able to move things forward and yet still protect people's rights. And thank you for mentioning about diversity too. That's truly important. So we will end this with views from Sammy, please. If you could build on what the others have said. Thank you.
Sure. So first, if it was if we're amongst the friends in a small group, I would have had my little thumb thing going off when they were saying these very really fundamental points about common vision, learning mindset, inclusiveness, fully agree, fully share, privacy, fully on board with all of those. Maybe I'll speak to a bit of the kind of real challenge of collaboration, which we've seen, and I think many of us also have experience with. I think shared purpose or common vision, when we think of, let's say, government and private sector, if one imagines two arms, actually, it's not that simple. Obviously, there are many, as our colleague from the central bank mentioned, there are many actors within the government. Simply speaking of government, right? If I think of ministries that we frequently deal with, we're talking trade, digital economy, central bank, customs, consumer protection, agriculture, all kinds of licensing agencies, which are very by country. On the private sector side, you have entrepreneurs, you have SMEs, you have larger companies, you have industry associations, you have logistics, you have to think about supply chain finance, marketing, customer service. So in fact, it's not two arms, it's more of a kind of octopus without kind of the coordinating agency in the middle. And so I think that's really a real challenge. And from our experience on the government side, I think we all also realize that governments are under significant challenge pressures, due to the events of the last, year or so, economic, budgetary, all kinds of pressures. And so I think in our experience, it's very important that when we think of public-private collaboration, we buy into a few things. One, it needs to be long-term, not just an event or a meeting. Two, the shared purpose needs to be followed, or shared purpose or common vision needs to have a champion or a leader of sufficient seniority on the government side who is able to work and influence across silos. Because otherwise, frankly, many good initiatives, die a kind of slow death due to the standard issues that, large corporate as well as government organizations may face. So I wanted to kind of remind us of the challenge that, learning mindset, all this is great, but how do we move across silos. And then I would suggest that it's very good, as I think also Li-Chu mentioned, to kind of take action quickly, to choose some pilot projects, some small cases to experiment, because what works really has to work locally. A couple of angles I might suggest people focus on are really thinking in each country, how can we help SMEs, formation, finance, going online, doing business? And how can we lower regulatory obstacles to trade? What's an obstacle? Simple definition. How can we do something which makes trade either faster or cheaper? Right? This is really what business is about, is faster and cheaper. You know, how can we allow our enterprises, in most countries, SMEs are creating the bulk of employment. How can we allow them to connect with either their local market or international markets in means which are, you know, faster, cheaper, while still subject to relevant, you know, government governance, so relevant taxes, KYC, all of those important factors are taken into account. That's one thing I would suggest. And I wanted to close with perhaps maybe a slightly controversial point, but I wanted to raise it to give people some food for thought. In my mind, from having lived in China for about 20 years, I don't think the challenges which face us in terms of digitalization are fundamentally about technology or about physical infrastructure. It's not about 5G. In a few years, there'll be something else. Really what it's about, if you think of China, what we've seen is that there has been a long-term process of growing online services, ease of doing businesses online for companies, as well as frankly for individuals, for sole proprietors, and significant government investment in physical infrastructure, education, and the like. So that created a virtuous cycle. But every country's situation is different. I don't think we should wait for some type of ideal physical infrastructure to start this process. Rather, every country needs to move forward, I would suggest, from its current condition. As was mentioned by, I think, other speakers, you know, places like Bangladesh, most of Africa, mobile payment is being done without smartphones. It's being done by quote unquote dumb phones, but it's still providing a very valuable service to those people. And so I think we really should move forward from wherever we are rather than focusing overly on particular sets of technology. Rather think about how can services be accessed. I very much echo the comments that the Deputy Executive Director made at the start of these 4 pillars, 2 of them being digital finance and e-commerce. How can we really make those types of services accessible in a real way for a larger percentage of our populations, and then take away barriers so they can you know, let loose their own dynamism. Personally, I think the responsibility at the last analysis is on all of us. And so thank you very much to everyone for this opportunity. Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you, Sammy. Wow, so we have heard from our panelists about having a common vision, sharing, having a spirit of innovation, being pervasive, working together from the private sector, government, and nonprofits, the importance of diversity, and then also to think about this from the long haul perspective, that we really need to, we're in this for the long haul, and we really have to work across the silos. And this means truly figuring out what is absolutely necessary to help people advance. So I thank you all for your insights on that. And I think collectively we had a really good perspective on what has to change and what has to be key elements when it comes to working collaboratively on these complex issues. Now we have just a couple of minutes left for a few questions. And so it's hard always to choose, because actually we have gotten in quite a few questions from the participants. I'm going to pick a couple that are practical questions and just related to what Sammy was just speaking about. And so here, there are 2, actually, yeah, 2 of them that I'm going to put together. So the first one, with many people not having access to smartphones, is the National Bank of Cambodia working to develop digital tools for regular cell phone regular cellular phones, that is SMS instead of apps, like what Sammy just called the dumb phones. But basically, that many people just have those kinds of phones still. So Serey, are you working on that? And then a related question is, and this is from Indonesia. We know that in many countries, especially in Southeast Asia, there are still indigenous people that are not touched by technology. So how should the government approach these people? Well, some of them reject globalization. How can we ensure that digitalization is approachable even to these people so that they're not left behind too? So Serey, I'll direct that combined question to you.
Okay, first, the first question. As I mentioned earlier, we have introduced probably one of the most sophisticated payment system using blockchain technology. But the irony is that the usage of smartphone devices in Cambodia is not that great. So we bore that in mind as well when we were developing our system. So simultaneously as we developed this very sophisticated system, we developed another system we call Retail Pay, which allow the USSD technology. So people can transfer money through the messaging text format. So by just using the standard feature phone. So we have this dual system working together to help those who don't have access to smartphone yet to still be able to participate in this digital payment world. And I also mentioned about the some rules on agent banking, where we allow shops around the corner to act as a human ATM in a way, a cash in, cash out outlet. So when somebody wants to send money to someone in a remote area, but they only have a mobile phone, what they can do is they can just go to the shops in the village and tell them their mobile phone number, show proof of identity, and still withdraw money from those shops. For the second questions, I don't really have any particular answer, and it's not just indigenous people in Indonesia. A lot of people here in Cambodia in the very, very remote provinces don't have access to those technology. And it's really a challenge first to build an ICT infrastructure to their area is something that doesn't come cheap. Second, you have to explain to them a whole lot of ideas and concept about finance, about telephones, and etc. So I don't really have any good answer, but working with the local authorities and local NGOs and get them to, on your behalf, for instance, in my examples, the central bank, is to get the local NGOs and local authorities, head of village, to go and tell them about the benefit of these services is very, very useful, rather than we go and force it down their throat and say, oh, this is good for you. So yeah, then come back to working together with different authorities and stakeholders.
Thank you for that. Those questions and your answers really reflect the reality of many people on the ground still in our region. The next question I will direct to Lee Chu. How can we adapt the digitization in education and learning and make it more inclusive, especially to geographically isolated areas?
Yeah, so, in fact, when Serey was answering the Indonesia question, I was just thinking about what are some of the in-country scaling initiatives that we are doing with countries in Southeast Asia. So like, for example, in Indonesia, the Minister of Education actually came up with this whole concept of Merdeka Belajar, which is learning freedom. And this is more of a university kind of initiative where he wanted to see how can we free up semester learning to include technology that would connect some of these university undergrads to the requirements of skill set in the future. And what we did was, we launched a program that integrates cloud literacy into a 3-semester curriculum across 5 leading universities and we are training the faculty members so that they can then teach students about it. We are also looking at tech companies, with remote learning now becoming more and more a new way of experiencing, the education. We're working with this edtechs who are also supported by government with, vouchers, Kartu Prakarja and all that, that hopefully as a reinforcement of some of the support packages that the government is issuing to extend reskilling of the workforce together with technology and institutions, we can start building, a change in terms of how education is being learned and how education is being experienced. I think the other thing is, as we think about the digital divide, conversations that we're having with the different governors would be, how do we bring technology to the villages, and how do we then have them, to Sami's point, also experience the power of e-commerce that opens up their ability, because as I mentioned earlier, cloud is a great equalizer. So it doesn't matter whether you are a one-man show or you are a huge multinational enterprise, you can still, test out ideas and you can develop applications that would support your business. So these are some of the things that we are doing with governments and also with institutions all across Southeast Asia.
Thank you, Li Chu. Next question is directed at Sami, as it's on e-commerce, and it's regarding the e-commerce systems in well-connected countries with good connectivity in the region, have a strong ecosystem. But then how can we really, I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, how can we really encourage a robust ecosystem of e-commerce across different countries when their systems are so different right now? So Sami, that one's for you, please.
Sounds like a very good opportunity for regional cooperation and collaboration. So I think the reality is, we all live, in the same world, that generally speaking, countries want to promote exports, but are not too enthusiastic about imports. There are a few large countries such as the United States and China, United States traditionally, setting aside the last 4 years, which have been more open to imports. And China is certainly encouraging more imports now in certain open economies like Singapore and others. But by and large, this is very challenging. If you look at ASEAN, if you look at Southeast Asia, countries are in very different positions in terms of economic development, technology, even governance capacity and ability. So I think rather than, my own view would be that rather than kind of setting, perhaps an overly grand ambition, maybe, for example, I can speak that I'm somewhat familiar that I know trade between Malaysia and Indonesia, not very easy. It's not very easy for e-commerce to move between these two countries. Malaysia, Thailand, there's obviously a land border, but it's also not super convenient. When you think of traditional customs procedures, you have a couple of elements. Setting aside any technology, even if it's entirely based on paper, a very practical issue businesses on either side face is that they don't know how long it's going to take. Depending on who handles the border clearance, things may go quite quickly, things may take quite a long time. So that impacts the consumer experience on the other side. So I think I'd suggest that there's tremendous opportunity, but really it requires this kind of, I think we described it as common vision, sustained collaboration, multi-stakeholder, and really building momentum. It has to really, governments ultimately have to see that these initiatives are creating jobs, creating tax revenue in their country, so they'll have support to go to the next step, And so I think it takes time, but it's essential that to move in this direction. There are many wonderful initiatives within ASEAN. So I'm just saying that it's still, in my mind, relatively early stage. So if one steps out from ASEAN, there's far more trade moving between ASEAN and China or Japan than there is moving within ASEAN. You know, if you look at Africa, it's far easier to trade between African countries and Europe or China than it is African countries amongst themselves. So these are challenging issues, which I fundamentally believe over time we have to work on, you know, little by little to really make trade more inclusive so that regional players can play a much larger role, in particular SMEs, and particularly, as I think one panelist, Clarence, mentioned, thinking always about the role of gender, local languages as well. That's my 2 cents, but probably a quite incomplete answer, Kelly.
Thank you very much, Sammy. And that basically concludes our session as we're almost at the top of the hour. So I want to thank you all so very much, our panelists and Deputy Executive Secretary Kaveh, Serey, Lichu, Clarence, and Sammy. Thank you for the fabulous discussion that we had and for your insightful answers. I'm going to do a 30-second summary quickly now to sum up. The importance of inclusiveness cannot be emphasized enough, as we all heard. Thinking bigger, the importance of uniting, linking producers with consumers, and the importance of thinking about common visions, sharing, the community, diversity, making certain we reach people in remote areas, and that we truly, truly leave no one behind were all key messages from this session. So I'd like to thank everyone so much again. Thank you very much to our audience and participants for the questions. We really appreciate it. And enjoy the rest of the SEADS seminar. Thank you so very much, everyone.